Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, February the 12th, 2024. Today is Abraham Lincoln's 215th birthday, so I thought I would take this opportunity to look at his horoscope. I don't know a great deal about Abraham Lincoln, apart from the obvious facts. He was president at the time of the American Civil War between 1861 and 1865. He was largely responsible for the sort of abolition of slavery. I'm sure that's a bit controversial. I'm sure lots of other people were responsible. And and he was assassinated, and he is also regarded as one of America's best presidents. You can see sort of lists of best presidents. Usually it's either him or George Washington that's chosen as the country's best presidents. So I want to look at his horoscope. And I also want to look at his Mars-Saturn midpoint, because I think his Mars-Saturn midpoint is very interesting for a number of reasons. But before I look at Abraham Lincoln, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Monday, February the 12th, 2024. So here is the chart for today. Monday, February 12, 2024, noon, New York. Top right, that of course is Abraham Lincoln. So the moon is now in Aries, or at least the moon is moving into Aries. It does depend on where you are. London time, the moon moves into Aries at 1:26 p.m. So sort of around lunchtime. So if you're in the UK or in Western Europe, then this morning and very early this afternoon, you'll have the moon in Pisces. If you're in India, the moon does not move into Aries until just before 7 p.m. I make it 6:56 p.m. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, well, the moon doesn't really move into Aries until tomorrow. If you're in New York, the moon moves into Aries at 8:26 a.m. If you're in Los Angeles, Portland, Oregon, Seattle, then the moon will move into Aries at 5:26 a.m. So basically, if you're in the Americas, the moon is in Aries for pretty much most of the day, so you can really treat the moon as being Aries unless you get up early. So you can regard it as a moon in Aries day. If you're in Western Europe, then the moon is going to be in Aries, certainly this morning and very early this afternoon. As you move east, then the moon moves into Aries sort of later and later. So if you happen to be in Russia, I don't think the moon moves into Aries until sort of 4:26 p.m. So it kind of depends where you are. So that does create a bit of a change. Moon moving from Pisces to Aries. Moon in Pisces is quite an emotional placement, quite a fluid placement. We pick up on what's going on around us. We pick up on the feelings in our immediate environment, and we try to respond. Moon in Aries, by contrast, Aries is a fire sign. Pisces was a water sign. It's more dynamic. It's more impulsive, the moon in Aries. We tend on an emotional level to sort of act first and sort of think later, or even feel later. So there might be a certain temptation to sort of act before we really have sort of felt through the situation. So that's possibly the main thing going on. It's not actually a particularly busy day astrologically. Another aspect is Mercury semi-square Neptune. you can see that Mercury is sort of 11:52 Aquarius, something like that, at noon in New York, and Neptune is at 26:08 Pisces. So they're 45 degrees apart. In astrology, people sometimes sort of neglect to look at the 45-degree angles and 135-degree angle, the semi-square and the sesquiquadrate. But they are important because, a semi-square is 1/8 of the circles. A sesquiquadrate is 3/8 of the circle. And the number 8 is important. It's a square, but it's a square halved. Because 90 square is 90 degrees. You halve 90 degrees and you get to 45 degrees. So it is dynamic, but I'm not sure how dynamic Mercury semi-square Neptune is. So Mercury is the way we think, the way we talk, it's the way we communicate, it's the way our brain works. It's in Aquarius, we're trying to be very logical. Aquarius is an air sign, but then it's semi-square Neptune in Pisces. We try to be logical, we try to stick to the facts, but somehow we get confused. So just because you think you know all the facts doesn't mean to say that you're able to make a good decision. Just because you're being logical doesn't mean you're making a good decision. You might think you're being logical, but there are things going on you don't understand, and the facts on which you make your decision might be wrong. Consider that possibility. And Mercury semi-square Neptune might also have an impact on how we communicate. We might communicate in maybe a kind of deceptive way. Neptune, deceptive. We might mix words up. We might say something without meaning to and create the wrong impression. So be very careful how you communicate, even if you're someone who, indeed particularly if you're someone who is very logical, who prides yourself on your brain power and with the right choice of words. Something can go wrong today. So do bear that in mind, especially as the moon is making a conjunction to Neptune. That conjunction between moon and Neptune, particularly important if you're in Europe, Asia, Australia, New Zealand, as that moon conjunct Neptune is going to make the Mars semi-square Neptune even more difficult. If you're in the Americas, by the time you wake up, the moon Neptune conjunction will be pretty much over, so I don't think you need to worry about it too much. Another thing going on a more positive note, again, particularly if you're in Australasia, Europe, Asia, not so much if you're in the Americas, is that the moon, as it leaves Pisces, makes a sextile aspect to Venus and Mars. So at some stage in the day, there may be an opportunity to be very charismatic and to be able to, communicate in a very sort of desirous way, it might be a good opportunity to impress people, attract people, but also in general to be charismatic, because Venus and Mars is not just the planets of respectively of female and male sexuality, but they also are a very charismatic pair. So that should be good. Now, as far as the midpoints are concerned, the Sun is making an aspect by semi-square to the Jupiter-Saturn midpoint. It happens quite regularly. It happens every 6 weeks. But the Jupiter-Saturn pair is connected with the economy and the business cycle. And so some of us might regard this as being important. We won't be just focusing on our own material interests. We'll be thinking about broader society, economy, and wondering how it might impact us. We might be more interested in economics and politics and business. When I say business, I mean the wider business cycle. I suppose things like interest rates, employment. Is there going to be a recession? Is there not going to be a recession? Biden says the economy. Well, if you're in America, Biden says the economy is great. Do you believe him? So you might want to give some consideration to that. Apart from that, it is a day where there isn't a great deal going on astrologically, at least from my perspective. And so I'm not saying that nothing is going to happen today. I'm just saying it looks a bit quiet. There's not a great deal for me to comment on. Nonetheless, I am going to look at each of the 12 signs. So here are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Monday, February the 12th, 2024. Aries. The moon is moving through your star sign, or to put it more precisely, the moon is moving into your star sign. And that does kind of depend where you are, as I said at the beginning. If you're in the Americas, the moon is in Aries pretty much all day. It goes into Aries in the morning. I think you can really regard it as being a moon in Aries day. If you're in Europe, then the last half of the day is the moon moves into your sign. I'm afraid if you're in Australia and New Zealand, the moon is not going to be in Aries. So what I say if you're in Australia and New Zealand may not fully apply to you. So bear that in mind if you're in Australia and New Zealand listening to what I say about Aries. But in a general sense, with the moon moving into Aries, you are becoming more assertive today. You feel better able to deal with the world and its problems. Recently, over the last few days, you might have felt a certain inclination to retreat, to look at things from afar. And you may not have been fully comfortable with having a high-profile social life. Well, things are changing. And I think that you can now fully integrate with the world around you, and you can be something of a leader. So that is certainly something to be welcomed. And in terms of leadership, the moon, the moment it moves into Aries, it makes a sextile aspect with Pluto, and so you do have the capacity to create change. And you can do this in quite an easy way. It's not going to be difficult to create change. It just needs a little bit of talents that you've already got plenty of. And so through your efforts, you can change the way people think about the world. If you want to influence them, then you can do it ever so gently. You don't have to shout to get your way. You really don't with the moon sextile Pluto. You can gently persuade, and it doesn't have to be much of a fuss. And your social skills are further improved by really your capacity to network, to be able to talk to lots of different people through lots of different mediums, whatever those mediums are, whether it's face-to-face, over the phone, text message, all of that. That's something you can definitely do. So really, Aries, try to reach out to as many people as possible. I hate using that word, reach out, but sometimes it's become a bit overused, hasn't it? But I do mean it, reach out. You can sort of reach out to as many different people as possible, and I think you will be successful in your efforts. In terms of relationships, you may not feel inclined to put too much energy into relationships. I mean, because the focus is on you. It's not on another person, and that's the way it should be today. You've got things to do. You're not really in a position where you should be listening too hard to other people. And indeed, if you do get involved with someone, one person on a one-to-one basis, it may not feel particularly satisfactory. You have got a set of things that you want to do. If you spend too much time with another person, they may actually weaken your impact. They may distract and confuse you. So do consider that. I think overall, Aries, it's just a day when it's okay to just think of yourself. Taurus, you are possibly not really in the mood for a lot of social activity. That particularly applies if you're in the Americas. If you're in Europe, Asia, well, not so much Asia, but if you're in Europe, then if you've got things to do on a social level, then try to get it done by lunchtime. After lunch, that your social ability and your inclination to get involved with other people will start to decline. If you're in Australia, New Zealand, then I think it's okay. I mean, I think, in fact, if you're in Australia, New Zealand, East Asia, then in a way, my forecast for you is completely different. Then I think it's a much more expansive, socially orientated day. If you're in Australia and New Zealand and East Asia, relationships are going to be great. You're going to be attractive and charismatic. I don't know how many people watching this are in Australia and New Zealand. That is one of the problems about doing these horoscopes when I'm trying to talk to people across the world. But it's difficult when I've got two different readings, and I can't possibly have. I can't really have a set of readings for people living in America, a set of readings for people living in Western Europe, and then another reading for people living in Australia and New Zealand. I'm sorry about that, for having this sort of truncated reading. But if you are in Western Europe and America, where I think most of my audience is, then it's more of an introspective day for Taurians, and it becomes more introspective as the day progresses. Now, another thing, Taurus, is that many of you are going to feel confused today, wherever you are. Yes, you're going to have big ideas that you want to put into action, but actually putting those ideas into action could be really difficult, probably because you've made some false assumptions somewhere along the line, and at the same time, Taurus, there is something a bit weird about you today, because I think you may be attracted to strange things. I think you will see some of you might actually see the benefits of things which other people don't want to touch with a barge pole. I mean, I suppose it depends what you're doing. Now, for example, Taurus, if you have a job in waste management, or if you have, for example, if you're an undertaker, or you work in a funeral parlour, then it's going to be a great day. Things connected with garbage and death are actually quite lucky for you today. I'm not going to say things connected with crime are lucky for you, because I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to suggest that. So Taurus, yes, you garbage and death. If you happen to work with garbage and death, death as in being an undertaker or a mortician or something like that, then yeah, you might have quite a successful day. But if not, then Taurus, you might still find yourself wanting to expand in sort of strange areas, areas that just other people don't really want to get involved with. And really, that's pretty much all I've got to say. If you're in relationships, you want to know about relationships, what should I say about relationships? Well, I think you have to appreciate, in terms of existing relationships, that partners are in a process of change at the moment. Reason being because in the Taurus chart, Mars does rule your opposite sign, which is Scorpio. And Mars is in a changeover position. It's moving from Capricorn to Aquarius, and that may reflect on your partner. They may be in the process of change, and I think you need to respect that. They're not quite sure what they want, and they're moving from one phase to another. And things might be clearer, in a day or two's time. So, okay, that's all I'm going to say, Taurus. It's an interesting day, but it does kind of depend where you are. The experience of an Australian Taurian is, I think, going to be very different from the experience of, say, a Taurian who lives in New York. Gemini. Mercury is your ruling planet, and Mercury is making a 45-degree aspect to Neptune. Gemini, you are supposedly very logical. And I'm not singling you out because I'm a Gemini as well. But Mercury, Mercury's your ruler, you're supposed to be logical. But with Mercury's sextile your Neptune, there may be limits to how logical you actually are. You might think you're being logical. You might think that you've got everything sorted out. But this may not actually be true. You are prone to making mistakes. I think this particularly applies in terms of sort of career and work. Things going on at work could really confuse you. So it might not be a good idea for making business decisions or for doing anything important at work, which requires a total knowledge of the facts. So if you're thinking about making some kind of career-based or business-based decision, it might be just a good idea to just pause for a bit. Just make sure that the facts and your assumptions really are correct, because there is some danger of making a mistake. However, I'm not saying that it's a bad day. You're able to make good progress in your social life. Particularly with the moon moving into Aries. From a Gemini perspective, that does make you more dynamic, more assertive. You can meet interesting people and form, good relationships with them. And I think you'll come over as being quite interesting, thanks to a sextile between the moon sextile Pluto. You will be, in many cases, the sort of the new approach, the new vision, the vision of the future. You can show that. You can demonstrate that if you want to, if you have the opportunity. If you don't have the opportunity, then maybe you can actually create that opportunity. And I think overall today, yes, I've talked about capacity for confusion, but at the same time, you are quite a powerful person. You are really able to impress your view of the world onto other people, and I think in many cases they'll accept what you say, and that will allow you, to really boost your position. And in certain situations, Gemini, you can actually apply huge amounts of force. And I mean that, I think, in a constructive way. You can, all of a sudden apply power. People just wonder where it's coming from, but it's coming from you, and you can really make it happen. Finishing up with relationships, I would have said it is a good day for relationships, but particularly on quite a sort of light level. It's more about relationships with sort of lots of different people, the kind of relationships you have in terms of your social life, meeting one person, meeting another person, like that, rather than just focusing on one person. But it does seem that there is one person, maybe a couple of people out there who are actually quite powerful. They're able to, I know you're quite powerful today, but there's someone else who is also able to assert a considerable amount of power. I think in a constructive way, but not necessarily. So do consider that if you're planning on spending a lot of time with another person. Cancer. So when you do the Cancerian horoscope, you do focus a lot on the moon. Moon is, it's a fast-moving planet, satellite technically. And the moon is changing signs. It's moving from Pisces to Aries. Of course, if you've been listening to what I've been saying, in Australia and New Zealand, actually the moon moves into Pisces. It basically stays in Pisces all day. But if you're in sort of America, Western Europe, there will be a stage where the moon moves into Aries. So looking at the movement from Pisces to Aries, it's a change from being in a thoughtful mode, a sort of a mode where you're trying to think about the broader cosmos, what is your role in it, what you're supposed to be doing. And then moon moves into Aries. Remember, moon is your ruler, moves into Aries, and suddenly this creates a new dynamism. You have a clearer idea about what you want. And the moment the moon moves into Aries, it makes a sextile to Pluto. So you're able to be very, not just clear about what you want, but you're able to get other people to do things your way. And I think this particularly applies to career, business, your work. You are a powerful operator. So do try to put some energy in that direction, because I think you can accomplish a great deal. Once you're really focusing on what needs to focus, on what needs to be focused on. Now, if you are in if you're in Europe, and and indeed probably, if you're in Europe, Asia, if you're not in the Americas, then you might also feel the moon making a sextile aspect to Venus and Mars. And that can actually have an impact on relationships. I think Cancerians who are outside the Americas will have definite attractiveness and a sort of almost sort of sexual charisma. There may well be a sexuality to the way you can express yourself, but I mean that in a very sort of positive way, because it's moon sextile Venus Mars. It's not. It's sextile is a very gentle aspect. If you're in Americas, okay, not so much. But then on the other hand, if you're in the Americas, you feel more moon making a sextile to Pluto, which is moon sextile Pluto is still pretty charismatic, but it perhaps has less of the sexuality to that moon sextile Venus Mars has. But whatever way it is, I think that Cancer, like I said, wherever you are, I think you are going to be in a fairly powerful position today, and you'll be able to benefit from insights that you perhaps made over the weekend. You've perhaps been reflecting over the weekend. Now you can see how you want to put things into action. Leo. Well, first thing, Leo, is that the Sun is your ruler, and the Sun is aspecting the Jupiter-Saturn midpoint. I've talked about this, at the beginning in my general overview of the astrology for today. And so Jupiter and Saturn, Jupiter is about expansion. Saturn is about sort of restriction and discipline. And the Jupiter-Saturn pair are about the business cycle. They are about the economy. And while I think that the Sun aspecting the Jupiter-Saturn midpoint is going to affect everyone, I think it affects you more than the other 12 signs. I think that you are going to be very aware of how things in the world affect you. Decisions made by governments are going to affect you. And it might be a good idea, Leo, to look at what's going on in the world around you. Perhaps make a special effort to read the newspapers. Maybe you should buy a newspaper. Buy a copy of the Financial Times, perhaps. See what it's saying. And think about the economy, because it is going to have an impact on you and everyone else in the end. And Leo, today you can get that. You get it, and I think that's really really what you should be focusing on. And also, Leo, I think today you are going to be probably more focused on things like philosophy and politics than usual. You're going to be thinking about what's right, what's wrong, the broad picture, the picture that goes beyond your immediate environment, and that's good. And think very carefully, Leo, about what you believe in, because in light of what's going on around you, you may feel that you have to change some of your beliefs, or in light of what you can actually see, and also in light of what you're actually experiencing. And in the process, you need to get the big view. Don't get caught up in little facts. That's not the point. It's about the overview. Finishing up with relationships, I'm not entirely convinced that you're going to be in the mood for spending a lot of time with one person. If you are in Australia, New Zealand, Asia, perhaps, then for much or even all of the day, there may be things that have to be tidied up of an emotional nature. About interpersonal emotions, maybe things that need to be dealt with. I think, okay, so, and yes, there is there is a bit of passion and intensity, which may actually allow you and someone else to get close to one another. So yeah, it's one of those days when what's happening east is different from what's happening in the west. So relationships may be quite important if you are in Asia, Australia, New Zealand. In Europe, it's maybe in the morning, and it may be maybe some last chance opportunity to really get close to someone and to create ties that are sort of emotional and perhaps even intimate, so that kind of thing. It's because the moon is making a sextile to a Venus-Mars conjunction. If you're in the Americas, no, not so much. Perhaps if you're at 3 in the morning, maybe, but maybe you'll be asleep at 4 in the morning, 3 in the morning. It depends. I think in the Americas, you've got other things to be thinking about. Virgo. Now, being a Virgo, you like everything to be properly organized. At least that's the stereotype of Virgos. Of course, it's not quite as true as that in practice, but that's a stereotypical Virgo, wanting good organization. But today, that might be tough. Reason being that Mercury is your ruling planet, and Mercury is moving through a part of your chart that is actually very connected with organization. So I think organization is actually going to be quite important for you today. But it's making a semi-square to Neptune. And Neptune could cause a lot of confusion. So you're trying to sort everything out. You're trying to make sure that everything is in the right place. And that's a good thing to do. But you have to understand that things are changing all the time. You might be trying to sort everything out on the basis of one assumption, then your assumption has to change, and then it has to change again, and so you have to keep reorganizing. Virgo, I think you do need a high level of flexibility, and whatever system you're trying to create, you have to insert in that system, the capacity for change, to change as circumstances change. I think that it really is going to be important, Virgo. And Virgo, you also have to be careful about what you say, because I think today, you might be trying to explain something, and you might think you've got all your facts right, all your facts in the right order, and then you see that no one understands what you're talking about, or worse still, they think they understand what you're talking about, and your instructions get followed in a completely wrong way. So if you are going to communicate, be very, very careful how you communicate, and you have to keep it simple. And even then, there might be a misunderstanding. So in that sense, it could be quite a difficult day. Also, from a health perspective, you've got to be healthy. You've got to avoid pollutants. Be extra careful about avoiding pollutants with Mercury semi-square Neptune. We're always battling against pollutants, aren't we? But I think for you, it's everything's got to be clean and pure, and just avoid contaminants. I think as a Virgo, you understand that anyway. But today, I think you have to make a special effort in that direction. But I'm not saying that it's going to be a terrible day. You clearly have an idea about the way things should be organized, and you're able to impress on people the importance of this idea. Now, there's a danger that you do, of course, become obsessed and sort of a bit compulsive about it. But if you if you're clear about your idea, and that's going to be difficult, not always easy, but you are able to bring to bear a considerable amount of power. So once you have a clear vision of a way you want the world organized, and once you've dealt with whatever confusions there are, yeah, I think you'll be able to express yourself very powerfully. And I think in when you're dealing with people, I think that you will very much be able to hold your own. Though I should say that in very close relationships, it might be a bit different. In some respects, your partner is actually in a very strong position, and they may want to assert their will, their view of the world, with actually quite incredible power. Is that a good thing? Well, I suppose it depends on the situation. Libra, it's starting to be a situation where you do have to consider other people. But then I suppose you're a Libran. Librans traditionally do give consideration to other people. But it's becoming quite strong now, because, the moon is moving into Aries. You're a Libra. Aries is your opposite sign. Okay, it happens every month. The moon moves into Aries. And so when the moon moves into Aries, you do have to consider the other. And do make space for other people, and also consider how other people are impacting your life. And you see, that's important, because you see, if you ignored other people and you said, well, no one influences my life, you're a free spirit. If you took that view, then you would find that the influence of other people is happening behind your back, and you wouldn't really know how to deal with it. But by accepting that other people have an influence on you, then you are actually in a stronger position. Now, in terms of what I say, there is some geographical flux here. What I'm saying is perhaps not so true if you're in Australia, New Zealand, Asia. That may be more about something that's going to be about tomorrow. So in Australia, New Zealand, you can perhaps be more independent. So it kind of depends a bit where you are, but certainly if you're in the Americas and sort of Western Europe after lunch, then you do have to take into account the social dimension, and there may be some quite interesting play with power, not in a negative way. There may be a question of who is making the decision, who is the most powerful in any relationship you're in. That is the question, and I don't actually mean power in a negative sense. It's about who is in control, who has the greatest understanding of the emotional environment. And of course, the person who has the greatest understanding of the emotional environment is likely to be the person who gets their way. Now, is it a good idea for you to get your way? Not necessarily, because Libra, and what I'm saying here relates, wherever you are on the globe, there's just certain things that you are getting confused about. I mean, there are things you want to do. You kind of have a sense of your self and what you should be doing with yourself, but somehow it just doesn't actually happen like that. It just somehow you try to assert yourself, you try to get your feelings out, your opinions out, and you just get confused. And so the actual practice of asserting yourself may not be as good as the theory, and you might end up in certain cases making a fool of yourself. So in fact, if you find that someone else is being the one making the decisions, provided they're the right decisions, provided it's someone you can trust, then that is probably that's probably the right thing. If it's you making the decisions, I don't know, I think somewhere along the line you might get something wrong. Scorpio, you are starting to understand that the world around you isn't perfect, and that something needs to be done. Now, you cannot change the whole world. That's just not possible, is it? But you can certainly change your immediate environment. Because if you look at your world, the world that you have control over, the world that you're allowed to change, you can change it, in very personal ways. As a Scorpio, you have particular views about the way things should be done and the way things should be organized. And today you should not apologize for those views. So you can make changes to your world, which I think will be fairly uncontroversial. I don't think anyone is going to oppose you. So I think that is something to be welcomed. And I'm thinking, I suppose, primarily about your home and your living space. Your living space does need to be, does need a bit of change. It's just got a bit tired. Some things have got a bit out of control. And so I think, yes, I think you can do some useful organization today. That's especially if you're in the Americas. If you're in Australia, if Asia, Western Europe in the morning, then perhaps the day is a bit lighter. In fact, with the moon making a sextile aspect to Venus and Mars, so if you're a Scorpio, if you're a Scorpio, I'm not talking about that moon making a sextile aspect to Venus Mars doesn't really affect the Americas, but if you're east of on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, in the whatever the Eurasian landmass, then it is a bit lighter, especially earlier in the day, and there is something about you that's going to be actually be fun and attractive. So see what you can do with that. Really, that's about it. I should say, though, that wherever you are, Scorpio, you are going to be good when it comes to handling people, communicating with people, getting your message across. So, whether you're in Sydney or New York, reach out to people, talk to people, tell them you exist. Even if you don't know someone, but you feel you want to know them, now is the time to make contact, because I think making that contact will be actually much easier than you expect. Sagittarius. I think things are getting a bit easier. Over the last few days, many Sagittarians have felt a bit landlocked. Landlocked in the sense that you've been sort of stuck in one place, maybe. Or I say landlocked, it's like perhaps feeling like a landlocked ocean. You're there, there's a certain amount of flow there, but there's a limit to that flow. And I think as the day progresses, you're going to find it easier to interact with the world and to enjoy yourself. Enjoyment is really important, and certainly that's the case in the Americas. In Europe, it's kind of more sort of an after lunch thing. So you're going to find it easier to enjoy yourself, easier to be creative, and being creative in quite a powerful way. Um, Creativity. We use this. I probably overuse this word creative. Creative. What I actually mean by creative is something that is completely individual. It's a very individual process. Creativity. It doesn't come from somewhere else. It comes from you. Indeed, if you are being influenced by other people, if other people are closely involved, it may actually be quite difficult to be creative because that just interferes with the creative process. It becomes someone else's creativity, or worse still, some fake creativity that's that you downloaded from the internet, maybe. But I'm talking about real creativity that comes from you. And that's something that you can really bring to bear, Sagittarius. Especially American and European Sagittarians. And through that creativity, you can create real change. And so wherever you are in your social life, at work, at home, whatever, don't be afraid of this. Don't be afraid of allowing your particular inner vision of the world to actually be the source of this change. Indeed, it's the right thing to do. Full stop. It is right. Definitely the right thing to do. Now, if you are true to yourself, I think that is going to make your relationships with other people easier. I think that if you're not so sure, if you're unsure of yourself, and but you sort of know that there's something that you're supposed to be doing, but you're not entirely convinced. You don't, that's going to make relationships complicated. But if you're sure, you know that this is what you want to do, then people will pick up on that. Some of them might not want to get involved. Fine. Other people will think it's great. By giving a clear message, you create the possibility of very clear clear understanding, and that is going to improve relationships. And I should say also, Sagittarius, that today actually you are really powerful. You can be actually powerful in quite an explosive way, having the ability to impose yourself upon a situation and immediately change it. It's as if everyone is minding their own business and suddenly Sagittarius appears from nowhere, and everything changes. It all happens with a big bang. Obviously you've got to make sure that the situation is right for that, but it's something that you certainly can do. Capricorn. I think Capricorn, things are slowing down a little. That's the first point. I think you're not entirely in the mood for, being here, there, and everywhere. I think there are things you want to sort out in your own way, in your own, with your own space, in your own space. This may also relate to money. There may be financial things that you're thinking about, you're starting to worry about, and you're thinking, well, hold on, what am I going to do? And maybe what you need to do is you need to work on them. You need to think them through. And you can't perhaps do that with other people's help. Well, unless they're real experts, your accountant, for example. But yeah, I think that you need to do it in your own way, and because Capricorns, they're it's a sign that has a good understanding of money and material things, and so give yourself a chance to do that. And I think that is one way of making use of the prevailing energies. But in another respect, there is something not very Capricorn about today, and not just today, but perhaps this period, a few days past, few days ahead in the future, that there's something about you that right now that you're getting confused about something. There may be moments where you are just totally in chaos. You think you're all there. And I'm not talking about health or anything pathological here. I'm just talking about things that happen astrologically. Inevitably, they happen to all of us at particular points. But right now, for you, then there's going to be particular points where you just have a blank, where you're just no longer present, and you just move somewhere else, and that might be good. It might be that you can experience something really interesting, but it's not a time to be dealing with important things if you suddenly become spaced out. And I know that being spaced out is not something one normally associates with Capricorns, but that is something that could happen today. So do bear that in mind. Now, just because you're feeling sort of more introspective than usual, it doesn't mean to say that you have to completely ignore the outside world. The outside world does matter, but it does seem that if you want to engage with the outside world, and if you want to, for example, be successful at work and business and whatever, you just need some time on your own. The pressures on you, the decisions that need to be made, they need to be worked out in your own way. I think not with other people's help. Now I should finish up by saying something about relationships. With relationships, it does depend where you are. If you're in Australia, New Zealand, East Asia, then I think it's going to be probably a very good day for relationships. I think that you're going to be attractive and charismatic, and people are going to like you. And I think you and other people can really strengthen strengthen ties between you in a sort of a major way. And yeah, it's a good time for building relationships, and it's a time for making the most of your attractiveness, and other people are going to find you really interesting and appealing. If, on the other hand, you're in the Americas, I think that relationships can really only work on your level. I mean, particularly close relationships, they can only work in a situation where you have complete trust. So you're probably talking about someone you already know and trust. With new people, I don't think so. I just don't think you're going to be in the mood to interact with new people, to developing new relationships. I think you'll take the view you've got other things going on, other things to worry about. Aquarius. You are becoming today a little more sociable, I think. Better able to express yourself, better able to express your view of the world, but slowly. You still feel that there are other things that need to be done, and you may take the view that the outside world isn't that important, that you've got perhaps other priorities, and that's fine. I just think you probably just need to take it slowly, and possibly there isn't going to be a great deal happening today. As I said, for all of the signs in my general overview today, astrologically, there isn't much happening. I should also say, Aquarius, Mercury is moving through your star sign, and that is good. Mercury is a planet of intelligence as well as communication, but it, while moving through your star sign, Mercury does make a semi-square to Neptune, and that semi-square Neptune could be quite difficult. It could confuse you, particularly in terms of money. You might get confused about something to do with money. Just it doesn't make full sense, and you might want to resolve a matter, draw some conclusions. But are those conclusions right? Maybe not. And at the same time, I know that you're a rational Aquarius, but there are just going to be times today, and it's pretty much similar to what I was saying with Capricorn. There could be times today where you just are not with it. You're just in a particular space that you don't really understand what's going on. And so what you really don't want to do in that kind of situation is to make decisions. That would be a bad idea. Not perhaps listen too hard to other people. Some people are going to have some very strong opinions about what you should be doing, especially in terms of business and career and what's going on with the economy. I've talked about this before. This general concern about the business cycle that seems to be going on today, and some people are going to have a view, but is it the right view? If you're going to listen to one person's opinion, then make sure you listen to another person's opinion, and then another and another and another person's opinion. But even then, you're an Aquarius. You're an independent-minded Aquarius, and as all Aquarians should be. You have to make your own decisions, and that is something that's going to be very important. Pisces. The moon is starting to move out of your star sign. Kind of depends where you are. If you're in Australia, New Zealand, East Asia, the moon will be in Pisces all day, and so you're going to be emotionally tuned into the world around you, and you will benefit from the fact that the moon is making a sextile aspect to Venus and Mars. So Pisces in East Asian, Australasian Pisces, you're going to be attractive and charismatic, and make the most of your social life, because you can meet lots of interesting people. If, on the other hand, you are in the Americas, then the moon is out of your sign. If you're in Europe, the moon leaves your sign around lunchtime, early afternoon. So it's a kind of a bit of a different picture. And so, with the moon moving out of your sign into Aries, then your focus is going to be different. Your focus is possibly going to relate to finance, money, material stuff. That might sound tedious, but actually quite useful, because the moon, as it goes into Aries, it makes a sextile aspect to Pluto. And so if you think about it, Pluto is in Aquarius, which is the sign before Pisces. The moon is moving into Aries, which is a sign after Pisces. So this moon sextile Pluto is right across your star sign. So your star sign is in the middle of it. And when it comes to material stuff, actually Pisces, I think you can really assert yourself. You can really make things happen. And in fact, overall, you are powerfully placed, and you can actually assert yourself in quite a surprising way. People might have underestimated you. They might have thought you were just easygoing Pisces, but suddenly you can really make an impact. Suddenly you can tell the world what you want and how you want it done, and you can do it in quite a surprising way. And because it's quite a surprising way, people are just going to follow, just do what you say. And that is certainly good. Now, looking at relationships, and in the Pisces chart, your opposite sign is Virgo. And Virgo is ruled by Mercury. And Mercury at the moment is semi-square Neptune. So other people are going to be confused. A lot of the important other people. So if you're dealing with someone regarding money or business or don't necessarily take what they say too seriously. Consider the possibility they're wrong. And in other relationships, romantic, whatever, there is a bit of confusion there. People don't really know what they're saying, don't know what they're committing to themselves. They may commit to one day, in one sort of 1 minute segment, they might make a commitment, and then in another 1 minute segment, they might break that commitment. So, people may be a bit flaky today, Pisces. I think you just have to accept that and not take them too seriously. So those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. Bit confusing because of the time zone thing, but I think today the time zone issue was quite very important. It's not usually so important, but I think today it was important, and I think it is quite a different experience if you live in Australia compared to if you live in, say, California. But that's only one way of looking at what's going on today. And now I want to turn my attention to the I Ching. So, as always, I ask the question, what is Monday going to be like for people watching the I Ching segment of this video? So, the first hexagram I got was hexagram 59, which is dispersion. Dispersion is about a lot of water. It can be connected with flooding. I hope I don't necessarily mean real flooding, but it's a situation where we have a sort of a metaphorical storm. Everything gets washed away, and that might, on the surface, seem a problem. Because, no one wants to get washed away, do they? But what happens when people get washed away is things get moved around, and movement might happen, which could be fortunate. We could suddenly find ourselves moved somewhere else, and that somewhere else may actually be the right place. It might be the place we want to be. So there is a fortunate aspect there. But there is a moving line. The fifth line moves, and we have an indication here that some of us might feel under a lot of pressure. The I Ching talks about sweating, this really difficult decision, and something's really bothering us and we're sweating. And I suppose dispersion, you've got more water, the water of our own sweat. And there's great sort of nervousness and what are we going to do? And we're perhaps dealing with a chaotic situation because it's dispersion and we just don't know how to handle it. And then we get an idea. It suddenly makes sense, and that idea brings us some kind of resolution, and we now see what we need to do. So through the chaos, through the flooding and the storm, it all suddenly comes together. There is that sweat. I suppose it's almost perhaps like a fever. And then the fever breaks and we get the idea and we know what to do. And then fifth line moves. Now, what does it move to? It moves to hexagram 4, youthful folly. And I was thinking about this, and in a way, what I want to say to you is, what are you doing? What are you doing watching this video? In a way, you're wasting your time watching this video. I mean, I know I'm not supposed to say that because I like you to watch this video, because you know, it's good for my channel. But right now, you may be wasting your time watching this video, because 4 is about youthful folly. It's about knowing the answer. This is an astrology video, I Ching. You're coming here for answers, but actually you already know the answers. You don't need me to tell it to you. And that's youthful folly. So maybe you should just turn this video off right now. Don't bother with what I've got to say about Abraham Lincoln and just do what you have to do. Because that's what the I Ching is saying. You know what needs to be done. So you have the idea, and just you know what needs to be done. There is that sweat, that fever. The idea comes. Maybe it's about you keep asking the oracles. I mean, I don't know if you use tarot cards. I don't know what you use. If you use tarot cards, you keep asking the same question, and really you keep asking the same question, and the oracle just throws it back in your face, and it says, "You know the answer. Stop bothering me." I mean, that's one. That is one view. So I suppose what I'm saying is I shouldn't waste your time any longer, and I should just basically say, you know what needs to be done. Okay, assuming you haven't turned me off, I'm now going to look at the horoscope of Abraham Lincoln, whose birthday it is today. And yes, he will be 215. I mean, obviously he's dead. He's been dead for a long time, but it is his 215th birthday. So, happy birthday, Abraham Lincoln. Now, I am not a Civil War buff. I'm not. I don't really know a great deal about the Civil War, so I'm not. If I get something wrong, don't go crazy on the comments. I'm not. I'm just looking at his chart. Just want to get an idea of, who he is. I've never really looked at his chart before. I always knew he was an Aquarius, but that was it. Abraham Lincoln. So he was born. He was born at sunrise, supposedly. His category it's a B category birth time. That means, I think it means it comes from a biography. But I think the general view that he was born at sunrise, so that makes him a double Aquarius. And I think your general view is, yes, that he's America's best president, or one of America's best presidents. And so yes, he's a double Aquarius. So what I suppose you could say that he might reflect the very best of Aquarius. Now, by the way, I should say, normally when I look at a famous person, I try to be critical sometimes, but I don't know enough about Abraham Lincoln to try to look at alternative views of him. So you might think, oh well, there is a bad side to Abraham Lincoln. I'm not really going to bother with that because I haven't studied the subject. I don't feel confident enough to try to put forward any alternative views. I'm just going to take the view, perhaps a naive view, but I'm just going to take the view that he's a great president. I'm just going to say that, just to make it simple. You may disagree, but I'm just so let's take the view that he is one of America's greatest presidents, and so you've got he's a double Aquarius. So that might say that Aquarius is at its best is independent-minded. It doesn't just go with whatever the prevailing fashion is. That's what Aquarians should aspire to. So being an Aquarius, for example, he I know that he's associated with the Civil War, and so some people might say, I suppose, if you're a fan of the of the Confederates, or you think it was a real disaster that the Confederates lost, you might say he was a warmonger. I mean, let's not forget, in the Civil War, I think something like 655,000 or something like that soldiers died. Not to mention other casualties. The casualty, total casualties. If you look at everything, not just the army, it can maybe over 1 million. But he's not intrinsically a warmonger. I mean, there was a war with Mexico in the 1840s, which he opposed, which was not a popular thing to be doing. But he did it. So he was not someone who intrinsically thought that war was a good thing. And so his independent-mindedness and his belief, his opposition to slavery, that may be reflected by his Aquarius. Aquarius at its best, I suppose. Aquarius is a human sign. And it's about, I suppose you could say that, that perhaps goes back to the sort of traditional 60s idea of Aquarius hair, that's freedom and people having everyone having the right to sort of liberty and everything else. So that might be how his Aquarius was working. I mean, one aspect of it. He has a Saturn-Neptune conjunction on his midheaven. I think the Saturn on his midheaven kind of makes sense. Clearly, he was someone who was very hardworking. He came from a very poor background, and he worked hard and he studied. He studied. Apparently, he was self-taught. He became a lawyer and got into politics and became president. So it was a real show of sort of upward mobility, and he was certainly able to work extremely hard, as you would expect, with someone who had Saturn on the midheaven. But Neptune is on the midheaven as well. Now, Neptune on the midheaven can work in many different ways. Neptune on the midheaven, actually, you can be a makeup artist with Neptune on the midheaven. But I obviously, Abraham Lincoln wasn't a makeup artist. Neptune, in this case, I suppose you'd have to say, represents something quite idealistic. Maybe the idea of abolishing slavery was quite idealistic from a perspective of the middle of the 19th century in the US, and maybe that was part of his ideals. I don't know. I mean, that is one way of looking at it. And so Saturn conjunct Neptune, you could say that Saturn conjunct Neptune, at the most positive, would be taking a set of ideals and turning them into reality. I mean, for most people, Saturn conjunct Neptune is a very difficult conjunction, and perhaps that's what's going on here with that Saturn Neptune conjunction. He's having to really focus on turning ideals into reality. So that's possibly how that Saturn-Neptune conjunction on the midheaven is working. But yeah, I mean, taking things seriously. Oh, we should also point out that his mother died when he was very young. Something like when he was about 9 or something. I'm sure you know the answer to. And the 10th house, the midheaven, does represent the mother. And so I suppose having Neptune on the mother and Saturn on the midheaven and Neptune on the midheaven, may indicate a lost mother, a mother who died, and that may have impacted his life and his ambitions. Because in Western astrology, we normally take the 10th house as the mother, and somehow the mother is more connected with our ambitions than the father. It sounds a bit strange, but maybe his mother dying had an impact on him. made him feel that somehow he had to meet some kind of ideal. I don't know. I mean, so that is a possibility. Now, as far as his ability to work so hard, to study so hard, he's self-taught supposedly. There's his Mercury-Pluto conjunction in Pisces. Now, normally Mercury is, you'd say that Mercury in Pisces is actually not very well placed because Mercury rules Virgo. I certainly would still say that, and but nonetheless, in his case, Mercury seems to be working okay. I mean, it is conjunct, and it is conjunct Pluto. Maybe it benefits from a conjunction of Pluto, although we should say that Pluto was not discovered until 1930, but it still seems to be working even though it hadn't been discovered yet. So that would be how his Mercury-Pluto conjunction was working. And maybe in terms of the way his brain works, Mercury in Pisces, they can really absorb a lot of information very easily. Mercury in Pisces, not just through study in the books, just by through absorbing it. You could say, like a sponge. Maybe that's how part of it. Although he studied very hard. I think didn't he study? When he was studying to be a lawyer, I think he studied Euclid and geometrical proofs, so that to help him with his law. So if you can prove it, if you can learn how to do a mathematical proof, it can help you prove something in the court of law. That's his Mercury Pluto, which is a bit surprising. That it's in Pisces. I haven't really studied Lincoln, but I would have said just that Mercury Pluto must be working okay. So that's that. Sun, he's associated with war, with the Civil War. And I think we have to look at his Mars. And he's got the Sun trine Mars. So he's got Sun rising, trine Mars in Libra. Mars is in the 8th house. 8th house, obviously there's a lot of connection with death there. The Civil War he launched, or helped launch, I said 655,000 people were killed. That doesn't mean to say it shouldn't have happened, but still, that's a lot of people, and maybe over 1 million when you count everything up. Perhaps that's a Mars in the 8th. Of course, that may say something about his death, being shot by John Wilkes Booth, but 1 in 12 people have Mars in the 12th house. Mars in the 8th house. So you could say that Mars is weak in Libra. Now, just because you've got Mars in Libra doesn't mean you don't know how to assert yourself. I don't know, the German General Rommel had Mars in Libra. A lot of people think he was a great general. I don't think he was quite as great as some people make out. But Mars in Libra doesn't mean to say that you're militarily useless. Again, 1 in 12 people have Mars in Libra. And there's another thing about that Mars in Libra. That Mars in Libra is in mutual reception. You see, Mars is in Libra, which is the sign ruled by Venus. And Venus is in Aries, the sign ruled by Mars. So there he's got Venus-Mars mutual reception. And that makes that Sun trine Mars quite fortunate, really, because it's Sun trine Mars. It gives him a lot of dynamism, and power. Now, one thing about the Sun, Sun is a bit of a problem, because actually, what is the worst sign to have your Sun in? Any ideas? Well, it's Aquarius. It has to be Aquarius. Reason being is that the Sun rules Leo. It's in its detriment in Aquarius. And so if you take a point system, like William Lilly has a point system in his book Christian Astrology, he gives a planet in its detriment -5. If it was in its own sign, it would be +4, +5. And that Sun, now, sunrise, was his Sun above or below the horizon? That's potentially quite an important question, because if the Sun was above the horizon, then the Sun would be in all the right places as far as sect is concerned, SECT, because the Sun would be in a daytime chart. The Sun is a daytime planet in a daytime chart. It would be a masculine planet in a masculine sign, which is Aquarius, and it would be above the horizon in a daytime chart. But if we take this time as given, the Sun is slightly below the horizon. So, there is I don't know how to deal with that, but maybe one should treat the Sun as being sort of above the horizon. Maybe we should treat this as a daytime chart, because we don't really know whether it's a daytime chart. Let me just check to see when the Sun was rising. Then let me just let's check when was the Sun rising. The Sun well, according to this time, the Sun rises technically at 6:57. So according to the time that I've got here, 6:57. Yeah, so this was about 3 minutes before sunrise. Maybe we should treat it as a sunrise chart, as being above the Sun being officially above the horizon. This is a problem when you've got the Sun rising. In which case, the Sun has by sect a lot of strength. So there is that question. Now, with Abraham Lincoln, we should not forget that a lot of people died because of his war, and if you've been looking at some of my previous videos, you will know that I've talked a lot about the Aries point. The Aries point is at 0 degrees Aries, obviously, and if you take sort of a standard sort of German midpoint system of Witter and Ebertin, the key aspects are the conjunction, opposition, square, semi-square, sesquiquadrate. These are the hard aspects. And so it might be a good idea to look at where Abraham Lincoln's Mars-Saturn midpoint was. So there you can see his Mars is at 25-30 Libra. His Saturn is at 39 Sagittarius. So his Venus-Mars midpoint is going to be somewhere in Scorpio, isn't it? Somewhere in mid-Scorpio. So looking at getting a precise view, we can see that his Mars-Saturn midpoint was actually at 1419 Scorpio. So let's go back to his chart. So that means that if his Mars midpoint was at 15 Scorpio, that would mean his Mars-Saturn midpoint would be exactly 135 degrees from the Aries point. So his Aries is within 130. It's 135 degrees from if you take a 1 degree orb. He's got Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So what does the Aries point mean? The Aries point represents the world at large. It's what impact you have on the world. And if you have Aries on the aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint, then you have the capacity to cause a lot of death if you are a politician. Now, I don't mean that necessarily in a bad way, but I can think of bad examples of people who have Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Hitler had Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, and clearly Hitler unleashed a war in which millions and millions and millions and millions of people were killed, and so that's how he occurred to the world. That's what happens when he became leader of Germany. Another example is Vladimir Zelensky. He has Aries aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint. He is president of Ukraine, and whatever you think of him, whether you think Ukraine is justified or not, he is leader of a country that is involved in a war that hundreds of thousands of people have been killed in. It's quite likely that more people have been killed in the war in Ukraine than were actually killed in the American Civil War. That's absolutely possible. Now, again, I'm not saying he was wrong. Well, I am saying he's wrong, but whether he's right or wrong, I understand some people might take the view that it's a price worth paying, that he had to get into this war, or that it was Russia's fault. But still, he's a war leader with Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Victoria Nuland had, the Deputy Secretary of State for in the US, who has, I believe, played such a large role in stirring up the situation in Ukraine. She has Aries aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint. As I've said, Princess Diana has Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And Princess Diana, who was born at the same time, on the same day in the same year as Victoria Nuland, of course, in her case, her Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, she's famous for her for her death. Her death was a global event, and it remains something that people are obsessed about. That's her Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Now, with Abraham Lincoln, I am absolutely not saying that he was wrong to start the Civil War. I'm just saying that he was involved in starting a war in which getting on for 1 million people died, and he has Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. He also, and his death, like Diana, his death is very famous. So so doubly, his Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint is having an impact on him. So that's his chart. I wanted to quickly see if there was, what was going on when the Civil War started. I don't want to look at his death. So I'm not saying I'm going to come up with anything particularly useful here, by the way. I'm not. So this is the start of the start of the Civil War. April the 12th, 1861. I think the traditional time is 4:30 a.m. was this when the guns fired, opened fire. This is, and so we can compare the Civil War chart with Lincoln's chart. I think there's something interesting going on here. That what's important about the Civil War chart, remember what I said, that Lincoln has the Aries point aspecting his Mars-Saturn midpoint. So look at the position of Neptune. Neptune was at 2957 Pisces. In other words, Neptune was pretty much at 0 degrees Aries. And so he actually had Neptune aspecting his Mars-Saturn midpoint. So you could argue that this was what he got himself into. I don't know what he was thinking when the war started, but it may have been something he perhaps wasn't fully expecting. But with Neptune on his Mars-Saturn midpoint, Neptune hitting his Aries point, with Neptune hitting the Aries point, Neptune, I suppose, is about suffering, isn't it? I mean, Neptune in Pisces is about suffering, but this is Neptune close to the Aries point. This great tragedy. I mean, maybe it was a tragedy that had to happen. And the moon was semi-square Neptune, because the moon was at 1536 Taurus. So this moon semi-square Neptune was kind of feeding into Lincoln's Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Another thing is there was Mars conjunct Uranus. So here is you can see that Lincoln had Neptune on the midheaven. So there's a certain sense in which I just feel astrologically. Now, of course, I may have got the history may be completely wrong. I'm not a Civil War buff, but there seems to be a certain sense of confusion in terms of Lincoln and getting involved in this war. Is this really what he was planning? But Mars was on his IC. In fact, there was a Mars-Uranus conjunction on the IC as he got involved in this war. So I think that is definitely Mars-Uranus was hitting his IC, and that seems to be what sort of caused it, and this what helped cause it in terms of his chart. In terms of America's chart, I should just remind you that just quickly looking at the United States chart, this Mars-Saturn, this Mars-Uranus conjunction was pretty close to America's descendant. And I think the start of the Civil War did seem to coincide with, Uranus starting to cross United States' descendant. So that Mars-Uranus conjunction at the time when the Civil War started was feeding into the descendant of the United States. Then there is a question of his assassination. I've looked at his assassination. I mean, didn't spend long on it, but I mean, it wasn't absolutely for sure, but I don't think this was a case where he was necessarily fated to die when he did. Or I suppose you could say that anyone who is a president is fated to die when they die, because when you get to be president of the United States, you don't really have much free will, do you? It's ordinary people like me that have more free will because we're irrelevant. But when you're president of the United States, what happens to you, the universe is very interested in what happens to you, I suppose. So when you die. Now, this is the chart of his assassination, not his death, but his assassination. You can see that the moon is rising. And I suppose, I suppose that gives you the indication that something that something is going on, and this it kind of more affects the United States chart, the assassination, rather than Lincoln's chart. So if you put the United States' chart with the Lincoln assassination chart. There you can see the moon is moving on to the United States' ascendant. But there is another thing going on with the assassination chart, and that is there's one thing that sort of links this chart with Lincoln and his assassin, is the fact that at the time Lincoln was assassinated, Jupiter was at 29 degrees 29 degrees Sagittarius, and Mercury was at 1425 Taurus. In other words, Jupiter was moving towards the Aries point, and Mercury was moving towards the Aries point as well, because remember, it's 15 degrees Taurus, so it's Mercury was going to be 45 degrees from the Aries point. So we have Mercury sesquiquadrate Jupiter. So when you look at Lincoln's chart and you compare it with the assassination, so he had Jupiter on his Mars-Saturn midpoint. He had Mercury on his Mars-Saturn midpoint. So that Mercury-Jupiter sesquiquadrate was hitting his Mars-Saturn midpoint. And of course, that is the death pair. So you could say that in many respects, his death was a Jupiter-Mercury thing, and particularly with Jupiter. Now, in terms of his assassin, so here's a chart of John Wilkes Booth. We do not have a time of birth here. I want to make one point is that I said recently that I associated the sign Taurus with terrorism. Someone wasn't too happy with that because they said the Queen, the old Queen, the Queen Elizabeth II was a Taurus, and she's not a terrorist. Well, I'm not saying all Taurians are terrorists. I'm saying that terrorists who are Taurians can be quite effective. Taurian terrorists include, I don't know, Timothy McVeigh, Andrea Bada, if you're into the history of German terrorism, Guy Fawkes, who tried to blow up the Houses of Parliament in 1605. So there are some famous Taurian terrorists there. And John Wilkes Booth, in a way, was a terrorist. He shot the President of the United States, and he had 3 planets in Taurus. I assume that Mercury, I don't know what time he was born, maybe that Mercury moved into Gemini, we don't know, I don't have a time of birth, but he certainly had the Sun and Mars in Taurus. His Mars in Taurus, also, it's interesting, by the way, that Adolf Eichmann, the Nazi war criminal, had his Mars at, I think, 1 or early Taurus. And he was hanged on his Mars return, and of course Mars in Taurus is the throat. So the hanging, definitely, that's a Taurus kind of way of dying. And of course, John Wilkes Booth had his Mars in early Taurus, very close to Adolf Eichmann's Mars, and of course, John Wilkes Booth was hanged, and for killing Abraham Lincoln. But with Taurus and terrorism, Taurus is a very literal sign. Taurus decides it wants to do something, and it just goes and does it. Other signs in Gemini will just say, well, that's a good idea, let's assassinate Abraham Lincoln, but then, but I've got something else to do. I've got a meeting with someone in a restaurant for a meal, and I haven't got time to assassinate him now. That might be a Gemini approach. But Taurus, I'm going to kill the president. Taurus says he's going to kill the president. Taurus is going to kill the president. That's how Taurus might work. Now, what I find interesting about John Wilkes' chart is his Mars-Saturn midpoint. So John Wilkes Booth's Mars-Saturn midpoint is at around 15 Aquarius. So his Mars-Saturn midpoint is semi-square. There you go. I don't know if you can see that, but that's the midpoint tree of John Wilkes Booth. And you can see he's got Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, like Abraham Lincoln. So the killer had Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, and the victim had Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And at the time of the assassination, Mercury was semi-square. Mercury was semi-square the Aries point, and Jupiter was square the Aries point. So that Mercury-Jupiter semi-square at the time of Lincoln's assassination was hitting the Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint in the case of both John Wilkes Booth and Abraham Lincoln. One final point I'm going to make, something I noticed, a note for the future. It's to do with the Civil War chart. What's interesting in that Civil War chart is Neptune. Neptune is at 29 degrees 57 minutes Pisces. Right now, in 2024, Neptune is in late Pisces. And Neptune is moving towards the Aries point. And Neptune goes retrograde later in the year. And let me just tell you where Neptune goes retrograde at 29 degrees and 56 minutes Pisces. You got it? Neptune is going retrograde this year at exactly to the minute of the place Neptune was at in 1861, when the Civil War started. Now, I am not obviously saying that we're going to have a real civil war in the United States, but we're getting Civil War vibes. Things aren't getting better. And so with Neptune moving on to the Aries point, that's going to hit the US really bad. And in terms of civil strife, okay, not civil strife, but the civil war that we're in. This fight for America's soul, all these issues, the border, Trump, Biden, abortion, states versus federal rights, all that kind of stuff. I think that we're moving into a civil war situation. Of course, history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. But I know people have been saying this a lot, that America's moving towards a civil war, but it's just interesting the way it echoes so much with the chart for April the 12th, 1861. One final point. One final point. Interesting coincidence is that FDR, the Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he died towards the end of a war that his side was winning. I mean, he died on around April the. When did he die? April. I think he died on April the 11th, 1945, and the war was over. The war ended on the Second World War in Europe ended in May what was it? May the 7th, something like that. In Japan, it was in July, and likewise, Lincoln died on April the 15th. Just at the end of the Civil War, but it wasn't quite finished, and it died. The Civil War finished on May the 26th. I just thought that was an interesting coincidence. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say. Again, I would wish Abraham Lincoln a happy birthday, wherever he is. Thank you for listening. I hope you found this video interesting. Or at least useful, if you did, then I'd be happy if you were to like the video, and if you're not subscribed, I'd be really happy if you were to subscribe, and if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. Thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you tomorrow.